This is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark, and we are coming back to talk about Act 4 of Fires of Ra, that is the Island of the Warrior Women. So I know we all have input on this act. So let's start with the scene one, unless anybody has something pre-scene one to talk about. But it's called A Wary Reception. So Jay, did you have any thoughts on scene one, A Wary Reception?
Yeah, this scene is a little different than a lot of the other introduction scenes in many of the other acts or even other adventures. This does happen sometimes, but it's one where the Delphi Council does not send you there like they don't ship you there. The Storm Knights are responsible for figuring out how to get there themselves, which is it's a little bit different than some of the other acts, and it didn't end up being a huge issue. One of the Afties flew my group, but so they got their flight there. But yeah, it's just a little bit different that way. And then it kind of turns more into it's kind of more of a social scene. The one thing I have noticed about this act is it seemed, aside from the final one, it's a lot of fairly short scenes, because oftentimes the scene will have more than one encounter on it. But this one tends to be like, okay, here's our encounter resolution, next scene kind of a thing, which is usually good for the Storm Knights because it lets them cycle Destiny cards more frequently, which they need to do because there's a double/triple DSR later on. But so basically, yeah, they can suspect that there'll be one coming. Although it does make it funny when you see people throwing away step Bs and step Cs and stuff like that. So the idea is they make it to the island of Hespera. So, of course, this island has transformed to be kind of like a Greek Amazon sort of reality, and everyone has transformed to become a woman, an Amazon warrior. So it's pretty unique in that respect. There's some other unique things which will be shown at the very end of the adventure of the act as well. But one thing I found interesting, and this is something I've thought about after I ran the adventure, and looking back on it, I think I would have run things a little bit differently. The concept is that the Storm Knights, as we know, they had to go get Sakana's bow,
Right.
As a gift to the Queen of the Amazons. But they are essentially a diplomatic party being sent by the Delphi Council to treat with an independent nation state. So sending, it depends on the makeup of your group, but if you have nobody that can talk in your group and they're just a bunch of like killers or what have you, then I think it may behoove you to send an NPC diplomat with them. Now, normally you would want them to be an Ord, so someone who's good at diplomacy, but not so good that they can't, like that the Storm Knights don't have to do anything. But that opens up some other things like, okay, so you're going to want them to be a Nile Empire Ord, because anyone from anywhere else is going to transform and potentially die. And if it's a man, might transform into a woman. So you probably want to send a female Nile Empire character, but you also don't want them to be a representative of Mobius's Nile Empire, so maybe even a Terran character instead. The one thing I thought of is maybe even the reporter from earlier on might serve as a good contact for that, just sort of surreptitiously bump her persuasion and let her do the talking. Still keep everything for the players, but when this starts, it's basically the Storm Knights arrive on the beach, and they're met by an advance party of Amazons, led by was it Avgo and a few others, and there's more hidden in the back. My party immediately saw them all, and in fact, I believe they might have approached down it invisibly or something, so they overheard some of the talking, so they knew something was up already. But even though they were not the most diplomatic group, they managed through spending possibilities to make a good impression and then get an audience with the queen. And that leads to my second thing about diplomacy missions is I don't know what it is, and every group is different, but there are some gamers who just cannot talk with authority figures in role-playing games. It's like, oh, you meet the king, and I say, hey, can you know, that kind of stuff. And you have to really treat these things seriously, and a lot of this adventure depends on what the queen thinks of the storm knights. So it's very important to sort of burn that into them. Whoever from the Delphi Council is sending them says, you represent all of us, you know, don't screw this up, kind of a thing. But either way, it's just a nice initial introduction to the island. Show them some nice pictures, describe the city of Olympos, meet some NPCs, and don't make too much of a fool of yourself. So just a nice little intro to get things started with some player ingenuity as to how they get there, which is nice.
Mark, your thoughts on scene 1?
This is perhaps my favorite act in the entire book. I love this act. This can be this is a very heavy RP act. You've got a lot of role playing potential here. For GMs, any named character in this act probably has a good piece of either box text or a role to play or impact on the final outcome. So I would spend some time with this act and look at all of the, like Avgo and the Queen and various other, we'll get to these characters as we go, but I would spend a little time looking at each one and figuring out how to make them unique so that they aren't all cookie cutter Amazons, because each one is a unique character and has unique roles to play in this act. And they are there's a lot of potential here for you to be able to draw your players out and have them stretch themselves. And to that point, I disagree with Jay on the send an NPC diplomat thing, because even if they are murder hobos that have just been hopping around killing things, okay, they're here to play this book, and this is an act in the book, and this is the team that they've put together. So let them, okay, yeah, this is the diplomat. This is the diplomatic heavy act, and there's a lot of RP stuff. And your team you decided to put together is nothing but melee bashers and shooters. Okay, how are you going to deal with the queen? Well, that doesn't mean that the characters themselves, the players themselves, can't talk. It just means that the stats behind those when they start rolling things are a little bit less beefed up than, say, a face character that's built out. I would let them run with that. If I were going to take pity upon them, perhaps in some way, and say, yeah, they're going to need a little help, maybe, as Jay suggested, the reporter or someone that they played romance from a previous act, so that you give some impetus to card play and actions that now have agency on how the game progresses, becomes someone that Frest says, well, take so-and-so. And, because I didn't do, just like Leamon, you said that, or Jay, you said they have to figure out how to get there. I kind of hand waved that. The act doesn't happen if they don't go to the island. So if you gimp them and start sucking resources out of them to get to the island, which isn't really a thing in there, it just kind of starts off with, okay, you're at the island. I'm fine with that. That to me is, if that's your game style, knock yourself out. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just, for me, we ended Act 3. You got the bow. Okay, you recovered. You recouped. We did our streetwise and our persuasion to get resources and whatnot. Here we are at the island. If you want to role play that out and go through that detail, sure, nothing wrong with that. That's just not my way. I don't. I hand wave it. So anyway, um, there's a lot of RP here. Make sure GMs make sure that as you're going through this, because as Jay pointed out, or Liam and somebody said, this is the impression you make on the queen is ultimately where this act ends. And so everything is either a plus, a minus, or a neutral. And so watch for your failures, your critical failures, your botches, watch for your outstanding results, watch for any really well done role playing that you're like, oh, that was good. Card play that affects interactions, social interactions, and any glory, because all of that should be taken into account at the end when the queen has to make her decision. So, and we'll get there.
Yeah, I'll state that again, we've talked about this previously on other episodes. Kind of how your game structure might determine, do you have hard stops in your game or do you let it go? Like if you are trying to just use this and what you have is kind of an open sandbox game, then if they stop and can't find the island, well then they might not do this, but there's other books that group can go to. But if you're players and you have got sat down to play Fires of Ra and nothing but Fires of Ra, then that's a different thing. So that's a good way that you might use
Fair.
it to judge it. One of the things that I've stated previously is that my world is a little different. It goes back to the classic Torg from the 90s. And I've mentioned previously also that one of the most favored NPCs of my whole Torg campaign has been an Amazon who the corporate ninja romanced and then like campaigned the subplot immediately and has they've been an item through the whole thing. And then when I started doing Torg Eternity, one of my players in a different group also wanted to be an Amazon and became like the student of the advanced character. And so those two characters are part of my circle of knights. But the way that and Jay kind of sort of said it in the you have to find how to get there, because the Amazons are very isolationists, and one of the point is to curry the favor and get the Amazons to join a side. So you as or your player characters as representatives of the Delphi Council are going there to get the Amazons to back the Delphi Council, and then Mobius is sending people to get the Amazons to back him. So there's that whole diplomatic thing. So those two characters, those two Amazon player characters, or the one was an NPC, the one was a PC, they had been doing things outside the world. So they were kind of like rebels who left the item or the island without permission. So while they were able to say, hey, here's the island, they were not going to go back to the island because then they might get punished. So that also set it up. And with the new players, they weren't their characters weren't directly connected to those Amazons, but their players, either by word of mouth or from previous characters, were connected. And I always do that where I interlink and connect things. So even if my player Tom, Toby is his character's name, even if Toby doesn't know Speranza, Tom's previous character was a love interest of Speranza, so then that makes it personal to the player, even if it's not the character. And then the player gets invested because this is about something that he knows as a player, and he gets to experience it through a different character. So that's how my player group got to it. The Amazons that they knew told them, but then they were like, oh, okay, you're Amazons. Hey, come help us talk to your queen. And they're like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to go back. We're not going to tell you why, but we're not going to, go back. And it was that kind of brought out that situation. So that was pretty cool. And it was Jay who mentioned that this is the kind of the point is to gain the favor of the queen, because this is a monarchy, and what the queen says is supposed to be what the followers do.
It's what we do.
So let's move on to scene 2, the dinner party. So Jay, what are your thoughts on the dinner party?
I think Leamon also alluded to something else to think about is if you have an Amazon PC in your party, this is probably going to change things a lot. And as mentioned, they might be reluctant to go back because it is said in this module that the queen doesn't want anyone to leave. And in fact, it might make dealing with Avgo later much more meaningful. Mm-hmm. So I think having an Amazon PC will in some ways really help you because they'll be more familiar with everything and be able to explain things and have insights. But on the other hand, be much worse, and possibly even want to throw in at the Furies. Who knows? But so this is for me. I think this was the most diplomatic and cool scene in this act. The dinner party is when, so my group, they knew something was going on, they didn't know exactly what yet, and then the Storm Knights get brought into this dinner and find out that there's a bunch of agents of Mobius here, and it's funny to think about how this adventure came out fairly recently, right? Mm-hmm. But the world has changed so much. Because I remember scouring the internet for hours trying to find a picture of a guy in a red zoot suit to use for the red hand. And it took forever. Now I could just get that generated. Bam, there, I'm done. But I eventually found it. So you have the Red Hand, sort of like your typical Nile pulp villain. You have Mirage, who is a undead, Nile Egyptian sorceress, and a bunch of female shock troopers, which we can thank you for having all these female shock troopers so that we can actually have pictures of female shock troopers in the books to use for things and tokens, and then being run by their commander Tali. So the most unbelievable thing to me in this entire act was that my group never played a romance card during the entire thing. They did, however, play a nemesis card on Tali during this dinner after one of the diplomatic incidents. But so that got to be a little something. And then one of the villains sort of became a recurring villain in the campaign, but my players never realized it, which was kind of sad. But anyway, so you're having this dinner party where you're trying to sort of state your case as to why the Amazons should back the Delphi Council or why the Amazons should back Mobius. And it's an interesting situation because the villains are just blatantly outright lying, but there's no real way to prove it. Even though in my group there were some, I don't think they had a way to prove it with those characters. It was a while back. But there's also a bunch of other things that can happen. There's like a list of 10 possible events, and you can just choose a few of them to have some drama at the dinner party, because what's a dinner party without some drama? And I did the choking hazard one where one of the shock troopers starts choking, and that's what caused this nemesis to happen, because Zoe ran over and Heimlicked and saved the trooper, and then basically did a taunt on Tali saying, "What kind of commander are you? You can't even save your own troopers," and got her. So this huge argument started. They had to force them to sit down. And I think the other thing that really stands that I remember is that there's the engineer as well, that they start talking about, Kreese, I believe. I'm not sure the pronunciation on them necessarily. So the Aurortian alchemist and her were able to strike up a big conversation throughout the whole thing. And I also used the one where someone got the note saying that the soup is poisoned, but it was the Edinos that got it, and he just ate the note and didn't tell anyone about it, so it never did anything. But ultimately, this ended up being kind of a stalemate. Nothing really went one way or the other, which is kind of how it's designed, right? It's like, okay, we've had the dinner, we've made our impressions, we know the other side is here now. Now everyone's just going to go and rest, basically, and that's where we move off to, and that's when I start praying to myself that certain players of mine don't decide to go lone vigilante, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes.
Mark, your thoughts on the dinner party?
I absolutely love the dinner party. So there are 10 events that can happen according to the way that the book writes it. They don't all have to happen. The more of them that you can work into the dinner party, I think it's more interesting if you do. And I just kind of started randomly picking which one they would have happen in what order based on how the dinner party organically went once you introduce the villains. And I think I kind of did a little thing with this one when we did it streaming. I think I subbed out Lady Hourglass for one of the villains and had her show up, if I remember correctly, in this event because it was fantastic, and it kind of put Rocket Ranger, or not Rocket Ranger,
The Lone Rocket Ranger.
Yeah, it was Rocket Ranger. Yeah, I think it was Lone Rocket Ranger. Put him in a bad spot. But no, it was, who was Mike playing?
Yeah,
he was the Rocket Ranger. He was the Lone Rocket Ranger. Yeah, I put the Lone Rocket Ranger in a bad spot because she was the one that had mind controlled him. And as I'm looking at my notes, Cool Hand Earp romanced Avgo on the beach right off the bat. So we had a romance in play from scene one. And going into the dinner party, we have almost all the characters that are going to show up. We have Federa, the high priest. We have the queen, Aegea. We have Christ, the head blacksmith, Lanthe, the general. A whole bunch of people are all here. And they're all, nobody knows who these people are, but the GM, you need to know who they are because they're going to play roles later on in the act, and they're very important. And based on how there's 10 events that you've got going on here where you can just wing it because each event's only got about a paragraph written on it. However your dinner party organically unfolds, let those events flow naturally that way. Pick a storm knight, assign that storm knight to that event, and then start calling out for find rolls or to spot something, or persuasion rolls, or intimidate rolls, or something like that when a villain leans over and insults somebody directly. And however you want it to let it unfold, what your storm, like, oh, this one. And if you don't want to do random, that's cool too, because you're like, oh, this is perfect for this storm knight, this will be a lot of fun. Do that. You don't have to randomly assign them. The goal is to have a good time. In fact, we had the spilled wine event is the one that was, in my opinion, the most memorable, because that one, somebody's knocking over some wine, and in this case, Cool Hand Earp gloriously with a 68 saves the wine from being spilled over, and he not only stopped it from being spilled, he did it so smoothly he snatched up the decanter from the startled servant, pouring it, and his glass, and Avgo's distracts the dinner guests from Crag, who flubbed the soup thing that was going on at the same time, and so he raised a toast, and so Crag, the dwarf character, had the whole soup thing going on with this is poisoned, and he's trying to do something, playing it off, and I think he rolled a 1 there, and Earp at the same time is doing the whole spilled wine thing, and because he gloriously managed to do this, everybody looked at him and didn't pay attention, so they balanced each other out. And in fact, we gave him a positive, or I gave him a positive on that. It was just, it was a lot of fun. So, and those events will become memorable to all of your players because in my opinion, there shouldn't, the dinner party should not devolve into combat.
Mm-hmm.
If the villains and the heroes get to the point where, as a game master, you're like, well, this somebody needs to draw a weapon and start blasting, or somebody needs to ball up their fist and punch somebody. Then whoever the villains are, whoever the NPC is that that you, the GM, control, you should have them turn and leave, or do something to remove themselves so that whatever the stimula that is provoking the violence or the combat or whatever leaves the dinner party for whatever reason. And that's looked on as a negative by the queen, because this is not the place for violence. We're here to have a dinner party. This is a social interaction. Everybody should be on their best behavior. And if you have to have Avgo, I think I did have Avgo drop that hint to the party beforehand. You're going to meet the queen. This is dinner. It's time. Everyone should be on their best behavior, protocols, diplomatic, this, that, and the other. And then you get announced and you go sit down. And that's when you find out that there are the villains there. And you get told, be on your best behavior and don't do anything stupid. Oh, by the way, the people you hate are sitting across the table from you. And you should see some jaws hit the floor, which was kind of how it goes. Because it's a lot of fun. But it should not be, this should in no way ever turn into a combat, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is a good scene to kind of see who for your players to see who their opponents are, and kind of do some banter back and forth. Like Jay said, you had that character who taunted the leader of the shock trooper for not saving her own shock trooper soldier. Having everybody except for the red hand being female was really cool, because that kind of shows a different approach than just a bunch of normal shock troopers and stuff. My group, I had the miracle worker was a human priest of Lanala, who was living land, and her being able to talk to the priest about religion and stuff was kind of cool and interesting, because a lot of time living land, and we've talked about this also when we were talking about living land adventures, they can have some deep, meaningful religious type things to talk about. They're not just lizard people or primitive humans who beat things with sticks, and that's about all they go. So there is some cool back and forth of that. I'm not sure if I did random except for the religious. I think that one, the player seeing a priestess there started that on her,
already.
Already, it was like, okay, that one's taken care of by the player, so that was
Yep.
that was fun. But I would suggest, if you're not going to use 10, give each person one. I normally like random things, but in my decades of gaming, there's the guy that's random. So whenever there's a random roll, it's just him. Just who's getting attacked, random roll. That's Anthony. Okay. And I usually do if there's, and I like big groups, so I have 8 people, so I roll my D8, and he's like the 8th person. Okay, I roll it again. He's the 8th person. He's gotten up before and moved to a different spot at the table, and the next random is him again. So I can't count on random with that group, because it will be he would get all 10 of these, and nobody else would, except for the character who did the religious discussion. But no, these are great. The spilled wine, the fake little note saying the soup is poisoned to get because they want you to make a scene. Oh no, the soup. That's what the bad guys want. They want you to make a scene and to determine, okay, and if I believe it's poison, do I not drink it and insult, or eat it and not insult? How do I get past that? And it just brings up a lot of role playing into the game, which again I agree with Mark that this is one of the best in Torg Eternity scenes of a diplomatic encounter that's not fighting, but you're still having verbal kind of
Oh yeah.
jousting with each other, because they're like Jay, my group had a lot of little back and forth, getting kind of a little like, oh, I don't like that villain, she did this, or I didn't like that one, red hand, I want to punch him later but I can't now, type thing. But it's a very fun scene, and afterwards everybody basically gets sent back to their quarters, because even though they're guests, they're kind of like guests who you don't leave your area. You have to kind of stay in your little quarters, because they don't want you going to the other place to mess with them. And that kind of leads to scene 3, night
Before
fight.
before
Sure.
you jump into scene 3, can I mention something?
Sure.
That's kind of important about the dinner party. We're getting to scene 4, but it's important when you're in scene 2 to take note of those things, like Leamon just said. You want to punch this guy or this gal, or there's animosity between these two players, because when we get to scene 4, they're going to come head to head again for a different reason. And you can see some of those animosities play out, and you should have taken notes about it here, so that when you get into scene 4, you can have those things influence what happens in scene 4. And I just wanted to say that because it's important for scene 2 that note taking get done when we get to scene 4. And you'll see, I'm not going to jump into why. We'll get there in scene 4. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yep. So scene 3, night fight. So Jay, your thoughts on night fight?
So this is probably more an issue with my group than the adventure or anything like that. But I've got one player who's always that guy who plays a rogue or a thief and decides that when the party's got nothing else to do, he's going to sneak off into the night and steal things. And in this case, he wanted to go do some recon. So this scene was 20 minutes of the players trying to stop him from doing that, and arguing about it. And even Avgo came in to remind them not to be found out. But eventually the Scorpions show up, right? And they get attacked in the night by these scorpions, giant scorpions with guns, maybe, depending on what stat lines you use.
Right.
They were taken out very quickly. And basically exactly what the writers intended happened. They stormed to the castle, they demanded an audience to throw it out there that the villains did this, and then they get there just in time to find the villains saying the same thing. Now, they did have witnesses on their side. The guards all survived. The guards all saw what happened, and somehow they had strengthened their bond with Avgo. I don't think it was a romance card, but something happened. I think maybe an outstanding on a persuasion or something. So Avgo is 100% on their side by this point, and already talking about, hey, can you? I'm thinking of leaving the island, of this stuff. So they march on in, and they find the villains already there, and accusations are flying, and the queen demands, okay, well, we'll do this by Episcoros, and all things, this would normally be a very short scene, because it's really just one fight and then a brief social encounter, but we just had to talk a man off the cliff for half of it. I think also looking at, I found my my notes, or my Roll20 page for the next scene, and I'm starting to think maybe it was actually Jack who had the nemesis with Tali and not Zoe, because the funny thing is so we're on the Amazon city, right? It's all women, and the player characters, there's Zoe, she's like a big burly woman, but gymnast, and she's kind of like the ideal of what the Amazons look at. And then there's Akrik, who's an Adinos, so does it count? Like, what is? They don't really know what he is. And then there's Oswald, and he's just very soft spoken and doesn't really talk to anyone except when he starts talking about alchemy, which becomes an issue later. But the final one, Jack, is like the most alpha male, beer swilling, cursing Australian guy imaginable, and he's just walking through this Amazon city like, oh, look at all these, all this stuff, and so he's really kind of making a lot of scenes everywhere he goes. So I think it was actually him and Tali that had this nemesis, which comes up later.
So to get Jay's little barb on the giant scorpions, the stat block, apparently it was a copy paste altered, and the ballistic vest, the M4 assault rifle, was not taken away from the giant scorpion stats. So that was just a
bang,
little,
bang, bang, bang,
a little.
bang, 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 bang.
Yeah, it was one of those things. It was obviously an error.
Yeah, surprise, your Storm Knights. What? They have their claws with little.
Yeah, it's like a little pop up.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Night Fight?
This scene was over very quickly. I seem to recall there is always the stealthy guy in the party who wants to, we're going down I'm not quite tired yet. I'd like to go do something else. And I think we had somebody else, Avgo or somebody, poking their head in and remind them of that too. The Scorpions, to me, based on, I mean, I can't envision it not being this way, but the Scorpions to me are very Clash of the Titans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Scorpions.
I forgot to say that.
And that's, I mean, I even used the image. I went specifically to find the image of the Scorpions from Clash of the Titans, and that's what I used on the tabletop when they popped up. This is the fight that the dinner party was not. And I'm trying to swap over to, this was the fight the dinner party was not. And everybody had, for us, I put 2 Amazon guards outside their rooms, who are there ostensibly to, you need something? Yes, let me get, and one guard goes to get the thing they need while the other one stays there to make sure they don't need anything else. And even if they decide they need something else, they don't need anything else yet until the other guard comes back. And then they need something else. And so there's always a guard there. When the Scorpions attacked, the guards were there because they had tried to get out, and the guards were like, no, you can't go anywhere. And they're like, okay, so we're prisoners. No, you're not prisoners. You're guests that can't go anywhere. And then they were like, okay, so the guards rushed in. The guards were not involved in the combat, but they had, like you guys said, they had witnesses to what was going on. And because of the romance, Avgo's clearly on the side of the Storm Knights. And so when they march into the palace, and Tali points and just that one. And there was I don't have in my notes who it was, but she just randomly picks somebody out and says, he did it. It's their fault. And now you've got animosity running through, and the Queen's just sitting there going, okay, trial by combat, done. You're right. And we're going to scene 4 for the Episcoros, which is a fun game. I would run this, GMs, I would run this dry, a dry run, and set it up on your own and play it around with it to see how it plays, and see, because there is strategy that works and there's strategy that doesn't work in this game, because it's actually, you could set it up as a game if you wanted to play it as its own little game. I like it. It's a fun little, it's an unusual event that doesn't occur. This kind of thing doesn't occur doesn't occur in any of the other books. I don't think anything like it. So maybe the death race in Blood on the Blasted Lands is kind of similar, but different.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot of fun. So yeah, this is just a straight up fight, and then you've got some more RP opportunities with the Queen.
Yeah, Night Fight, I'm assuming the authors, and I could be wrong, were because my group has a set number of sessions, which is 3, that they can go through without fighting before they just get so antsy they need to kill something. I know this from testing the
Historically.
historical things like 1, 2, oh, the NPC, their ally PC gets killed because she's sneaking around and they want to kill something so bad, that type of thing. So this is the release of the having to get your
Right.
the
pressure valve.
the pressure right. I did have a couple of players who had their characters actually just go to sleep. So when the Scorpions came out, it wasn't a full group against the Scorpions, so it actually took a little bit longer than it would if everybody was awake and ready. Because it says like they exist only for 10 rounds and then dissolve into a black pool of goo if it didn't last that long, but it did last enough for multiple witnesses to come and see it. As kind of was hinted at, but Avgo, she is an Amazon who wants to leave the island. And depending on the players and how they talk with her, she might bring that up. And with my group, having known 2 Amazons who left the island, we're like, hey, yeah, that's fine. We've seen that before, and then her ears perk up. So that's how they got in with Avgo and got her on their side, because they were like, sure, we'll introduce you to our other 2 renegades, Amazons and stuff. But basically what happens is they get attacked by Scorpions, and then at the end, Tally comes, and they have said that their side got attacked, but not necessarily by Scorpions, and then she points at one of the players, the storm or fire or something, something happened, burning down their little area, and that is the Storm Knight who did it. Now, if your players were lucky and got those relationships earlier and got Avgo on their side or guards on their side or whatever, and they saw them fighting the Scorpions, then they could back them up. You might do something as if your party comes in and they're just not caring who they taunt and disparage. Then even if that person was there, might not stick up for him, might not be, call as a witness and stuff.
But keep in mind, Mirage actually
she
looked like the Storm Knight. So an Amazon NPC who witnessed it saw the storm, did see the Storm Knight there. Whoever's randomly selected.
Even if you mind read Tali did see that Storm Knight.
Right. So because it's Mirage pretending to be the Storm Knight with her sorcery, and so that Storm Knight was there as far as Tali is concerned.
Right. So you have somebody saying they were here, and you have somebody else saying they're there.
Right.
But my main point was, if you go in and you just make enemies of all the Amazons, then they could not be your witness, and now you only have one person who's a witness for the other side. But it's a fun little thing, and it sets up I'm the queen. I have 2 groups saying opposite things. They both have my subjects vouching for them. So let's do this game, like, I don't know, polo-ish on horseback, which leads into scene 4, the Amazonian Games. So, Jay, your thoughts on scene 4?
It always makes me think of Rambo 3. So this is a funny one because, like Mark was saying, it's a very flavorful event, but it kind of just boils down to beast riding rules at its core. And we've talked about chases, and this is a modified chase / DSR. We've talked about chases before in the past, and I've said that there was one encounter where my players completely wrecked it almost immediately. That's always put me kind of off of the system for chases, and it was this. It was they basically completely dominated it. Maybe just slightly lucky, right? But I mean, they got an ABC card on the very first round. They spent a possibility and did the whole thing in one one shot for the first trial. Which brings me to the one thing. So I think an interesting part of this is the fact that the villains are obviously cheating, right? So they have arranged to poison the players' horses. But the poison, it's not enough, in my opinion, for two reasons. One, it only happens on the third heat, whereas if the players win the first two heats, it never comes up. Second, it gives a -1 penalty, which is like, ooh, whoopee. So I think I would have it happen on the second heat, personally, if I was going to run this again, because that way it's if the because the players are going to win the first heat, right? Like even if they don't completely dominate it in the first round, they're almost guaranteed to win the first heat. And so this gives the villains a better shot at actually winning a heat. And I would upgrade it from making a -1 to making it disfavored, personally. Make it so that the Stormnets can't just ride that possibility guaranteed victory. And then the third heat can be done more fairly. This way, if the players are lucky, they could still potentially win the second heat as well. I did have it set up so, where did I put it? That Tali and Jack were right beside each other so they could hurl insults at each. In fact, I have Jack right in the middle of all the villains for some reason. So I don't remember what was going on there. But he was like right in the thick of it. So the second heat, after they reset to score again, it did take longer. It wasn't like an immediate thing, but it was still fairly decisive. Players won, so they won, and so the queen is going to vote on them. And I had a good time with the red hand having like a freak out in the middle of it and making all sorts of inappropriate remarks that got him dragged away. And yeah, so then it ended at that. The players pretty much, oh look, we have succeeded at the mission. Yay us.
Right. Mark, your thoughts on the Amazonian games?
So I have 2 words for you, and they apply in this scene, and it's going to very rarely come up. Ride offensively. That card is applicable here. Figure out how you're going to do it, because it's going to be a little different. But the beast riding finally matters in a real material way, and this scene is it. And I like this scene for that reason, to let anybody who's decided they want to have beast riding or beast handling skills, I'll let that be applicable here. But the game is fun. Jay is correct in that the cheating that's listed really only comes into play in the third round. I don't know if I was lucky or unlucky, but every time I've run this, it's always gone to 3 heats, and so it always came into play. And I never noticed it until you said something, Jay, that this might not come up at all. But I mean, okay, I'm perfectly fine with the -1 being a -1. Every time I've run it, it was significant. There were rolls that were missed by 1. There were rolls that were made by 1, and so the impact of the fact that adjustment was there was significant in all 3 times that I've run it. This game is a lot of fun to me, especially where the complications and the setbacks and the critical problems that you get examples of what they can be. Have referees, and think if you're not into sport, if it's sports ball to you and you're not into football or basketball or baseball or hockey or any of the stuff where referees are involved, or soccer, football with red cards or whatever, figure out how that works and kind of have the referees be a thing, because they do play a role. It's a game, but they take it seriously. But the Olympian or the Amazonians more are in for the contest than they are for the victor, and they like a sporting contest.
Mhm.
So at the end, I think every time on all three cases, I think my Storm Knights won, and they were in favor with the Queen, and so they were pronounced as allowed to stay. And Mayhew was very upset about that for obvious reasons, because he's been hoping to try and get them kicked off. He's a perfect example of that, and now they beat him, in which because it's trial by combat kind of thing. Their claims to having been unjustly accused before the Queen seem to have validity at this point, and he is in a negative light, and now he's got to take matters into his own hands, which we will see shortly.
So, I would recommend game masters to read about the rules of this game, because I remember reading it a couple of times before going through it, because there's certain little things that like only one person may ride on a horse, and you can't get off your horse, no grab, and there's all these like little rules if you wanna do that. I remember actually doing this scene. I really have zero idea of how it how it went, other than I read this thing a couple of times to make sure I did it correctly. But as much as I dislike chases and like DSRs, this does it definitely has a different angle on chases, so that's why I incorporated it. I just don't remember it in my group. I want to say there might be a limit to how many people can be in it, because I sort of remember maybe on the stream, Mark, that one of the characters was sitting in the crowd talking with one of the Amazons during the game and wasn't actually
It just says at least 4.
Okay.
We may have limited it to 4. What did we have?
So
I don't have anything in my notes on
You
it.
leave your Dex 5 guy that's
Yeah.
allergic to horses behind.
Or maybe it was like, make a team, and he might have been like, this isn't for me. I don't
Well, I've got on the Roll20 tabletop that I have, I've got Erp and Yaren and Lone Rocket Ranger and Ivan on the field.
Okay.
Um,
So yeah, I remembered that, and as a person who dislikes DSRs, I remember this dislikes chases, likes DSRs. I remember actually enjoying this, remembering it, and putting it into my own game. I just don't quite recall what my own group did in it, because the next scene 5, was so memorable that it kind of kicked scene 4 out. But it sets it up that if your Storm Knights win, then they're declared the kind of not just the winners of the game, but their stance on we were attacked, and probably by Mobius's agents, is taken seriously, and the Mobius agents are told in the morning, you're going to get kicked off the island, get your stuff ready, packed up tonight. Otherwise, it would have happened to the Storm Knights. So let's move on to Scene 5, Ambush in the Temple, which is that night of after the game. So Jay, Scene 5.
So yeah, after this, the party plus Avgo get met by another Amazon, Althea, and she tells them that the Queen wants to have a secret meeting. Stuff's happening. Players immediately suspicious. But they follow her anyway to the Temple of Artemis, and they see that it's been defaced. The head has been removed and replaced with that of Nemesis, and there's a whole bunch of Amazons, and they get basically introduced to the Furies, and Althea gives Avgo a chance to to join the Furies, which she obviously turns down, and the Amazons are basically blown up by grenades in one round in my group. Jack finally gets, and this is also partially on me because we were incorrectly allowing multi-attacks, like multi-targets with blast weapons, which was errated later. So he was able, like, anytime they were fighting, like, just normal Amazons or Viking raiders or anything like that, he was just like, boom, 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 mass destruction, right? So they survived the ambush easily. So it was really more a scene of I just lost the word, just like revealing what's going on, the clues, and then finally with the last one to die, mentioning that something's happened to the queen. So now they know, oh, something's happened to the queen, it's on. And obviously we were not as successful as we thought. And it turns out there's an entire insurrection going on in the island, and everything flip-flops really quickly. So it's good that even though the combat was really, like, the fight itself was very easy, it still felt like a defeat almost, and it really sort of turned the whole mission on its head.
So, Mark, scene 5, ambush in the temple.
Yeah, this is I like the whole the Episcoros battle feels like, yeah, we did it, and this is the denouement of the story where we're the anticlimax. The mission is successful. We've won over and we beat them, and they have to leave, and now we're just going to go, and in the morning we'll go on to the next act and get our 5 XP and spend not so much, too little fast. I like the Furies. I don't recall these fights being super quick. The Furies held their own, and mostly because in the stream we had the romance played on Avgo, and Avgo was at risk here because I definitely had Furies attacking Avgo to put his romance card at risk and try and get some of his resources played on behalf of the NPC, which I believe worked. And the dying words triggered everybody to make a mad dash for the throne room, which easily moves everybody into scene 6. But this is a great scene setter, and to me it really was. The Furies were never really a threat to anybody. They were really just a resource sink. They got some lucky rolls, but for the most part, they're kind of like Amazonian shock troopers in that you're going to knock them over pretty easy, and their flavor for the scene. And they moved the story along really well, because now all of a sudden there's this revolutionary group of Amazons. Not all is right and well with the Amazons in Hespera, and then we move to scene 6. Did I trigger something, Leamon? You're madly you're squinting at something like
I was trying to catch up because my scene 5 went completely backwards from the other ones.
Okay, go for it.
So mine, this was the hardest fight within the whole act for my group, because the very first drama card, got flipped was card 40, which is always the worst one in all the decks. There is a setback, and in the Nile Empire, you have that nice handy-dandy chart that you can roll your d20 to randomly determine a setback, and it was everybody disconnects.
Oh, yes, you've talked about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the villains went first, and no cards are in play. So they got raffle stomped because villains were rolling good, exploding on bonus dice. All possibilities were being spent to soak. They couldn't spend possibilities to soak. So that gave them negatives for when they actually did go, because they had wounds. And that's the one time I did bring back the classic Torg GM Fiat. On the second round, it was another really bad thing. I think it was confused, so that they couldn't play cards. It was just like compilation of, and I had so many characters at like 3 wounds and are shocked out and almost dead, getting ready to roll for defeat. I was like, I am going to have a TPK for this little pre-fight, this because the next scene is like supposed to be the big fight. This is supposed to be the warm-up, and they were just getting completely demolished because of the way the cards played. And so the Game Master Fiat is where a Game Master can take the first 3 drama cards and rearrange them in whatever order they want and put them back there. A lot of times in classic Torg, Game Masters would do it to make it harder for those encounters that the player characters were just blowing through. I did it to keep a TPK from happening.
I've done that.
And the next 3 cards that I got were all like villains go first and hero setbacks, and they weren't good as it was. So like playing the rules of classic Torg, the next 3 cards were not going to be good either. But I gave them the best, and they did manage to come out of it alive. And then the priestess of Lanala was able to do a couple of heals as they went down to scene 6. So the moral of this story is the cards, the dice can be fickle, and things that are meant to be easy can be difficult and compound things, because when they went to the next scene, they hadn't refreshed possibilities, and they were low on cards that they were able to use on the third, and third, fourth, and fifth round and such. But it was just very, very difficult because of the way the cards were drawn. So let's get to scene 6, the battle for Hespera. So scene 6, Jay.
If we ever get to doing Revenge of the Caradon, I'll talk about how in the final act my group ran through almost all their possibilities in the first scene. So similar kind of situation. But for scene 6 here, the Storm Knights look for the Queen. She's missing. They find out information that she's down in the well of eternity. The vault of eternity. As I look at the map. Yeah. So it's an underground, and this is where they find the big secret of Hespera, that there is molten eternium down here that's being mined and fashioned into things, which is why the Amazons have such awesome armor and spears and everything. I'm kind of 2 minds of it. Like, it's cool and all, but I kind of miss the old days of Eternium only coming from the Omegatron. But it's out there naturally now. But this is like the biggest source of it. Now, very contrary to the previous scene, this combat took a long time and was actually very dangerous. And this was the first time that I really had the Nile, because they are elite Nile shock troopers. They actually decided to use cover. And so those pillars on the map got a lot of use. Like, players and enemies were like leapfrogging from pillar to pillar to try to get vantage points. It was all a lot. Zoe, because she's got like a toughness of, like, I don't remember what it is, like 20 or something, just sort of ran straight into the bucket hoist where all of the officials, the Amazonian officials, were sort of being held. And I remember she Sparta kicked one shock trooper off into the Lake of Eternium. They're still on the map there. But yeah, so the combat here, this was probably one of the most epic combat, aside from one Tharkold one, this is probably the most epic combat I've run in Torg Eternity. It was very fast moving. The Gorgon was rough. So, there's a Gorgon. That's where they got the blood to make the scorpions.
Yep.
Almost turned someone to, I don't remember who. It wasn't Zoe. Maybe Oswald. Almost turned someone to stone. I was like, I didn't think this was going to come up. But they actually, the fact that they had to focus so much on the Gorgon at first let the shock troopers just keep kind of like needle and diming them with like shock here, shock there, and it actually got to the point, because when you're a GM and the players are shooting at the villain and they start taking shock, and you're like, is it worth soaking shock.
Right.
Because if they're shocked out, they're essentially dead anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like such a waste, you know? But this was now starting to become the problem for the players. Like they were like, oh, 2 shock here, 2 shock here, 2 shock here. It's like, okay, now we have to start worrying about it. Let me just take a look at my map again to see if there's any other interesting things. Akrik used his cloak of fire, whatever that miracle from the living land is, and just basically waded into the middle of any shock troopers he could find. Zoe basically grabbed all of the officials and dragged them out. And I think Tally just got grenaded like so many things did in this adventure. But it was a climatic event. I have a whole bunch of notes and squiggles drawn on the map that I have no recollection of what they mean anymore. But the biggest thing is for me, Mirage got away, and she was sort of meant to be like a recurring character for the rest of the campaign, but because she could change what she looks like, the players never knew whenever they would encounter her again. So it was like sort of just my own little secret. But yeah, so in all honesty, I don't actually remember what happened to the Red Hand here, because I know the players, they didn't hate him as much as the Cobra, the Hooded Cobra.
Mm-hmm.
But he was high on the list. They definitely wanted to take him out, and they did. I just do not remember how they took care of him. But Mirage got away. Everyone else got defeated. It was just a big slugathon with Magia in the middle. But ultimately, they fought. They saved the Queen. They saved all of the officials. And the Queen decides, well, I guess you guys are on the up and up after all. And maybe I shouldn't have listened to these obvious villains.
Mark, your thoughts on scene 6?
So keep in mind, GMs, that when they come down the stairs and they enter this area, and I can't remember where exactly it is, you got to pick a line of demarcation, or the book tells you where, but you reset possibilities when they roll in here. There's so much energy flowing around because of the Eternium, the molten Eternium, that, you know, feel free to burn all their crap in the previous one and everything leading up to here, because what they don't know is when they roll into this chamber, you reset all their possibilities and they get it all back. And all of a sudden, if they're going to be flush for this big battle, and they're going to need it too. The Gorgon is a big deal. Run the Gorgon's hard. Run the Gorgon hard. He should be hard. As Jay pointed out, the elite shock troopers are smart and good at what they do. Tali's good at what she does, and the Red Hand is pissed. The way the Red Hand got away for me is that things were going badly, and he master criminaled out, and he used his master criminal perk and blew up with the stick of dynamite, which is what triggers the DSR with the rocks fall and everybody dies kind of thing. This really is one of the best fight scenes in all of Torg Eternity. You should pay some attention to it and really understand how all of this stuff works and interacts. You're gonna whack Senator Agathina out of hand. They just kill her, knock her off and that serves a purpose. You should know who the senator is, and in the dinner party, for no other reason than to get them to like the senator or whatever, have the senator interact with them at various points in the previous scenes, because when the fight starts, they just knock her off the island with the bucket hoist and she dies. Well, that should tell them that if you get knocked off into this molten stuff, it's a bad day. So that's her purpose in getting killed. But you've also got this wall of bad guys between you and the bucket hoist where they're trying to get to. So this is a tough fight, and it's supposed to be. The heat is going to give you fatigue +2 to a lot of things. So pay attention to the heat down in here too. The Gorgon, I think the Gorgon doesn't come out right away. I think it's like second round. The Gorgon
I think
breaks
it's
down.
hiding. Yeah, it's hiding in the little alcove cave thing or little.
Yep. So all of a sudden, boom! This comes out and nobody sees it coming. That could outright kill somebody. So I mean, the Gorgon is a serious foe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, pay attention to that too. Um, and keep in mind that because the Eternium, the molten Eternium, is putting so much possibility energy in there in the air that is so thick it refreshes their possibilities. If you need to come up with a reason for why something is possible or happens, you can link it to that. Glory down here should be very impactful. In fact, we did have glory in the I think who was it? Ivan. Ivan scored glory down here. We were working our way through the DSR, and the collapsed door had to get lifted up, and Ivan spit on his hands and rubbed them together, and then pried the jammed vault door open gloriously with a 65, and so everybody was able to escape as the ceiling came down. So this is really this is just such a great fight scene. There's a lot going on, and you need to pay attention to how much is going on and how it flows and how it works together. But if you run it right, this is going to be super memorable because this is a great fight scene.
Yeah, it's intense. I remember the Gorgon being the little ambush, and then the party shooting at the Gorgon, giving her a wound, which makes her bleed, which is a bonus die of giant scorpions. And then my party going, oh, that's how those scorpions, that's where they came from. And even though it is kind of heroes and villains, do remember the villains are almost two sides. You have the shock troopers, the Red Hand. They want something, but then the bad Amazons, they're trying to do a coup and take over. So they, even though they're currently at this point working together, that doesn't mean that they have to keep working together. So in my fight, the Amazons were actually, again, the elite Amazons, which decades of playing Torg and never having any problem against shock troopers, and then all of a sudden shock troopers giving them problems. We're like, hey, do you ever remember a female shock trooper before? No. Oh, that's what they do with them. They're the elite shock troopers. So that was fun, and it was much more difficult than what they were used to. And then you have the bad Amazons, the Gorgon, the giant scorpions, and my party, within say round 2 or 3, they think, let's take out the Red Hand and maybe we can end the thing fast. And then his like dying thing is to light the dynamite and throw it and start the DSR as the whole thing's collapsing. So the whole cave is collapsing, and there's so many enemies still present, and it gets to a point where they're like, we need to get out of here. But then the shock troopers and the Amazons are also, we need to get out of here.
Yeah.
And they rescue the queen, they're bringing her back, and one of the face character of the group, he looks at Tally and is like, truce, kind of a, do we both want to win, live type thing. So they kind of did the DSR together to get all of the shock troopers and Storm Knights out, and left the Gorgon and the Scorpions and the other Amazons back. So it was kind of a little swap sides to get the shock troopers out as well. And then it was still okay, we're going to leave the island because the Red Hand was no longer there. So they really didn't have a real reason to the gig was up basically, so they just had to leave, but they left. And I thought that was just a cool moment of and this also was a player based decision. I didn't say, hey, Tally looks at you like, hey, can we help you? That player was like, hey, they could actually help us, get out of this together, instead of fighting and trying to fight our way out. So that it was very, very cool. At the end, as Mark said, the queen realizes that the villains are the villains, that the Storm Knights were able to uh, stop her from being overthrown, and they then were able to take Avgo out, get permission as, what do you want we will join the Storm Knights side and not Mobius's side, but you being the heroes, what do you want as a favor? And they were like, let Avgo out and see the world. So the queen, is like, well, we're opening up our place anyway, so go along with it. So it was very, very fun act. Like I said, the only one I don't really remember is the games, but I think it's just because mainly that scene afterwards was just so burned into my head of, I can't believe a few Amazons are going to TPK my group. So, no, scene or act 4, the Island of the Warrior Women, very fun act, very exciting. It shows a lot of different flavor within the Nile Empire. You can lean into tropes like there's a lot of Clash of the Titan tropes. The dinner party is just a very, very different way of having some intrigue and some social etiquette and diplomacy working. So I really enjoy Act 4. So any final thoughts, Jay, on Act 4?
No, I really like this act. I think, I said before that I don't necessarily think you need Act 3 and 4 for the overall adventure, but they are definitely a good 2 acts. Like, if you want to take them out and just run these 2 acts without anything else, it still works very well. But yeah, overall, really liked it. My players liked it. Had some memorable moments, and I was expecting people to be making Amazons after, but they didn't. Shocking.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Act 4?
Act 4 in Fires of Ra is my favorite act in all of Torg Eternity. It's just it's a crap load of fun all the way around. It's got one of the best final fight scenes in Torg Eternity. It's really good. And as Jay pointed out, you can use acts 3 and 4. You could make those as a 2-act mini adventure, and you could set that. You could just for any reason, because there's not. I don't think I'm misremembering it, but I don't think the Amazons even play a role after this in the book. You go here to win them over to oppose Mobius, and then you go on to oppose Mobius, and the Amazons don't play a role. So, I mean, from the standpoint of overall the cosm of Torg Eternity in your Cosmverse, have them do something, but they don't in this book, and this is so pivotal and so well done that it's a shame that they don't have a further role somewhere else, that agency doesn't come to bear, and you should GMs do something with it, because it's so much fun. This is I like it.
So yes, sounds like we all agree Act 4 is awesome. Torg Eternity with a lot of various things, not just combat, but good combat as well as good DSRs and good diplomacy and all of that. So we highly encourage you to look at least the Act 3-4 of Fires of Ra, and we'll go ahead and wrap that up for today. And having said that, we do want to encourage you to email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. We'll read your email. If you have questions, we'll answer your questions. If you have comments, we'll comment back on your comments. But until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.